What's up, guys? It's been a while since I talked to you from the inside of the car like this. I guess you'll have watched yesterday's vlog, which is technically from the inside of the car, but I didn't have my mount set up, so man, this is a familiar setting. I haven't done it in a while. So I am currently headed to the grocery store to pick up a couple things. Emily is currently at a wedding, so I have had the run of the house this afternoon and evening. Naturally, I had to clothe myself before I left, because as we all know, any dude worth his shit will immediately declothe the moment that everyone is out of his abode. I also played Life is Strange Before the Storm episode 1. Finally decided to hop into that. I actually played the first half of that episode the other night, and just didn't end up getting to finish it. But that's what I wanted to talk about today, because I fucking love Life is Strange. It is absolutely 100% my favorite narrative experience in a video game of the last few years. It's so evocative, so heart-wrenching, but so down to earth and real, right? So I'll go ahead and say, and put it up on the screen, spoilers abound for OG Life is Strange and for the first episode of Before the Storm. I will be discussing several plot points. So, like I said, spoilers ahead. I like putting little brackets because I can put the text right in there. There you go. So, yeah. So, first Life is Strange game. One of my favorite games of all time. And something that it really had going for it was the supernatural time traveling element of it, right? It had an advantage over other stories that could have told the same story in terms of the interactions with all the various characters and the sort of central mystery of what happened to Rachel Amber. All of that could have been told without the framing of being able to fucking, rewind time and everything, right? I saw one of the fucking American Chopper memes that was like its derivative of Donnie Darko and Mount fell down again. So yeah, I saw an American Choppers meme that said that it was derivative of Donnie Darko and the Butterfly Effect, which I don't necessarily disagree with in terms of the time travel and the conceit behind it, and the sort of ultimately it boiling down to like one major decision. It's like save the town or save Chloe, right? Which admittedly undercut the tone of the story a little bit. But to me, that wasn't something that was something that was so obvious from so far away that I wasn't really upset about it. Like, the second that decision happened in the very beginning of the game, I was like, well, shit. They're going to do this thing, and it's like, that's the same thing with all, like, time loop, stories. They all have this sort of problem about being able to not break it down to very, like, binary, decision-making, especially in games, right? So right now I'm playing Before the Storm, and the first thing that I noticed about Before the Storm, or I guess the first two things that I noticed are, I didn't necessarily like Chloe as a character, even in the first game. In terms of, Max was far more relatable to me personally. And so I was interested to see how a game, sort of focused on her instead of Max, would go for me. So yeah, give me a moment. I'm gonna go do grocery shopping, and I'll be back. I'm back. Several hours later. Several hours later. Yeah, let's talk about Before the Storm, episode 1. The biggest kind of maybe letdown or just the biggest deviation for me is because they don't have the time traveling mechanic in the game. The story feels even more linear than it maybe necessarily should. And it's also a prequel, right? So it already has the fact that we know what happens to Rachel Amber working against it, right? And so you're really just trying to tell a story between Chloe and Rachel Amber, right? And since that has a definitive ending, and we know from the first game bits and pieces of the story already, it's how do you make that interesting? How do you make the new characters engaging? How do you make returning characters engaging? How do you set those characters up? How do you flesh them out? And that part's definitely interesting. Like, I think the segment in the school was probably my favorite. I'm curious because I don't know that they'll address the fact that I'm fairly certain some of the... It's been a while since I have played, but I'm fairly certain that some of the students they introduced don't go to Blackwell in Life is Strange, which to me would seem strange because I know like the one dude's older brother was a senior, so that makes sense, but there were definitely a couple of characters that I didn't recognize, and I was like, did they just transfer out? Like, that seems... If they don't address it, that seems to be, one, pretty lame. And if they do address it with it, they transferred out, that's equally lame. So I'm very curious to see. There was, like, the chick who runs the D&D stuff, and the chick who's, like, reading a book. I'm pretty sure neither of those people are in main game. I am also curious to see, because they obviously set it up at the very beginning, you can interact with a security officer, and knowing that David, Chloe's... stepfather type deal, knowing that he becomes the security officer for the school, I'd be very interested to see what happens to Skip, which is actually funny because at the very beginning of the school scene, they set it up to talk about the fact that Chloe skips school all the time, and he is standing right beside like the stairs you walk up to start the scene. And so when I walked up to it at first and it just said skip, I thought it was trying to prompt me to skip school, which I just thought was just coincidental level design. But yeah, so without the time traveling mechanic, it feels very linear, and then it also doesn't really play to any sort of interesting dialogue options and dialogue choices, right? So there's like the new mechanic, I guess, is like this backtalk mechanic, which is like where you are just a fucking dipshit teenager for seemingly no reason, and you yell at people until you get what you want. Like, those segments seem so strained and forced. Like, I don't know that anyone would, like, yell at a bouncer and he would just let you do it because you called his, said his dick was small or something. Or, like, there's another scene later on where there's a guy who's like, I don't know how to do CPR. And then she's like, you fucking do it. And he's like, why don't you go get help? And she's like, you're being a bitch. Do it now. And he's like, you should go. Like, why am I what? And it's like, I've won all the backtalk challenges so far, and none of them seem very difficult. So, I don't know. There was, like, the one with David was pretty good, because it was like, you were being just, like, snide to someone you didn't like. But a lot of them seem like pretty like ostentatious for no reason. And so it's strange. Like I beat the whole first episode, and it took place in a day, and it was kind of just like, okay, like I'm all right with this. The subplot of Rachel Amber's dad cheating on her mom, and like them like planning all of that, like that was very obvious to me. Especially, it was even funny because when they're looking through the viewfinder, and you start to riff on the two people that are making out down there, you'll notice that that's the only time that Rachel Amber didn't say anything. And so it was like, okay, I knew, like in my brain, I immediately understood everything that was going on there. Also, one thing I really, really did like is the kid who's trying to get forest fires, and there's a lot of signs in the school about forest fires, And then right at the end, Rachel kicks over the trash can and sets all that forest fire on. But then, like, it showed, like, kids sitting in the schoolyard still, and it was, like, the dead ass of night when Rachel and Chloe were there. So it was weird. It was like, why are these kids still at fucking school? And then they showed another scene of, like, the cops talking to Principal Wells and what looked like Rachel's dad. But then that seemed like it was earlier in the day. And then there was another scene where the girl who the dad was cheating on with is, like, smoking a cigarette at the end. And I was like, is that supposed to imply that she was standing there? Like, why are all these people? Why was this girl still at the park at fucking 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night? You know, it's like, it was the middle of the night when they were there. So I thought that was weird. Another thing that I thought was weird is you write your, like, next destination on your left hand, and there's, like, a button to prompt you to look at it. But the problem is that they show that text in cutscenes. So, like, I was in a cutscene when I was playing D&D before I went into, like, the drama class, and it was like, go, and it was in between the scene where it said pick up your DVD and go to drama class. So I started the scene and my hand said pick up DVD, and halfway through the scene my hand said go to drama class, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense, like, contextually, because it's clever because it's like, yeah, a teenage girl or teenage boy or whoever would write notes on their hand, but they wouldn't erase and rewrite notes on their hand. So that's kind of like, I don't know, for something that was kind of grounded a little bit in reality for the most part, that seemed kind of an odd design choice for me. Like, I would have been okay with them. I actually honestly probably wouldn't have noticed it if they didn't render that in cutscenes. Like, if they just blanked out her hand in cutscenes, it would have probably been better for me. And then there was one other thing. The choices. So at the end, you know, it does your breakdown of choices, and there were 4 major choices, and none of them were close. Like, the closest percentage was like 67-33. And I chose the majority percentage on all 4. Which leads me to believe that most people playing the game also don't like or don't want Chloe to be such a dickhead. And even looking at the end screen with the minor choices, it still seems like most people don't want her to be a dickhead, which to me seems counterintuitive to her character and how the character is supposed to develop. But one thing that I did kind of like, and I wish there were more choices like this, and I wish there was more setup like this. At the very beginning of the game, you talk to your drug dealer, bro Frank. He tells you that you owe him $175, and then you're, like, trying to get a T-shirt. You steal a T-shirt. You, like, knock this guy's car over. You grab a T-shirt, and then it's like, do you want to grab the money? And so, of course, in my brain at this point, I was like, I'm gonna try and play like a bad character. And this was before I decided, like, fuck that, I'm just gonna do what I want to do instead of, like, trying to, like, make her into, like, this angsty person. And so I stole the money too, and of course I naturally went back to him because she was like, oh, it's $200. And I was like, oh, okay, I see what you did. You made it exactly right. Well, apparently, and this choice only had like 7%. If you kept that money, you could then put it in your mom's purse later on because your Chloe's mom is, like, hard up for money. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting, because you absolutely set it up to where if I talked to Frank before this, that I would have that, like, planted in my mind already. So it's pretty interesting. Now, what's even weirder, though, is after the credits rolled, it gave me a preview for the second episode. And it was someone banging on the door, and it was saying, you know, no one steals from me, give me my money. And they made it a point to say, like, the person who ran that, like, mill venue was a, you know, this top tier drug dealer or whatever, and, you know, there would be consequences in this stuff for stealing the money, right? But the guy whose money we stole was the merch guy for the band that was playing. So either the merch guy for the band that presumably isn't just from Arcadia Bay, but either the merch guy for the band also worked for the dude who was running the venue, or the guy who runs the venue was just selling shirts of a band that came to his venue, which is equally stupid. So I was like, I'm confused how that works. And also, you didn't have to steal that money, so did you guys just... How many different scenes were there, right? Like, could I not steal the money and then have gotten a different scene? How does that play into it? So I thought that was an interesting choice that they decided to preview a scene that didn't necessarily have to happen in everyone's game. So, but overall, I would feel like most of my issues with the game right now are middling to minor. I still enjoyed the story. The scene in the junkyard where Chloe is like hitting the car is very emotional. Again, narratively, it's so different. There's no supernatural elements. Although the thing with like her dreaming and her dad, and that like ravens are popping up and her dad's like responding to her, like to me that's less supernatural and more just like coping with grief, and like the way your mind is coping with that grief. I mean, that's understandable. But there's no like in the first game you had like, are the Prescotts like kind of maybe like controlling the town through like mind control or some shit? Like, is that lady that's at the diner really like Max from the future? Like, there was all these like plot threads that like basically never got explored, but were still there to just kind of lead you on tangents and, you know, through the sort of surface level of like what happened to Rachel Amber, right? And so I don't know. It's just it's different and it's shorter and it has a specific story to tell. But I did enjoy it and I did like playing it, and it did still manage to capture the feeling of Life is Strange the way the first game did. So yeah, that's my review of the first episode of Life is Strange Before the Storm. I'll probably play the other two and let you know how it goes. But until next time, I'll catch you guys tomorrow.